Do you have a pain you don't tell anyone about? A secret struggle, a persistent weakness that humbles you, that constantly reminds you that you are not perfect? Perhaps it's a chronic illness, a battle with a sin that haunts you, an anxiety that paralyzes you, a limitation that seems to mock your greatest dreams. We admire the heroes of the faith as if they were made of marble, untouchable, perfect. But what if I told you that the greatest and most influential apostle in history, the man who wrote half of the New Testament, carried a secret pain, a weakness so profound that he called it a messenger of Satan sent to harass him? In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul opens his heart and reveals his most vulnerable secret, a thorn in the flesh. For centuries, theologians have debated what it could be. An eye disease? Malaria? A stutter? Relentless persecution? The mystery remains. But the greatest mystery is not what the thorn was. The greatest mystery is why God, who gave Paul the power to heal others and took him in visions to paradise, refused to remove his suffering. What is the divine purpose behind an unanswered prayer from such a powerful man? This message is for you who have been praying for deliverance and have only found silence. For you who feel weak, flawed, and wonder if God can really use you. For you who look at your thorns and see them as a sign of disqualification, of rejection. The answer God gave Paul was not what he wanted, but it was what he and all of us need to hear. It is a revelation that transforms our perspective on weakness, suffering, and the true power of God. By the end of this video, you will understand why God allows certain thorns in our lives. And we will discover together the only answer that unleashes the power of heaven right at the point of our greatest pain. Brothers and sisters, today we are going to step down from the pedestal of religious performance and enter the place of honest vulnerability. We will walk with Paul in his anguish to discover a power that only manifests in weakness. Stay with me, because you are about to discover that your thorn is not your end, but the gateway to the manifestation of God's glory. The ordinary world of the Apostle Paul was anything but ordinary. This was a spiritual giant. The man whose shadow healed. The man who survived stonings, shipwrecks, and imprisonments. More than that, he was a man of extraordinary revelations. He says in 2 Corinthians 12, "I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, and he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter." This was his resume. He had access to heavenly secrets. In the eyes of everyone, he was the ultimate example of strength, authority, and spiritual power. And it is precisely in this place of greatness that our story begins. David, the victorious king, after defeating all his enemies, acclaimed by Israel, living in the palace. It is at the height of power and comfort that David's greatest vulnerability and greatest fall occurred. Pride is the enemy that attacks us at the top of the mountain. In what area of your life do you feel strongest, most self-sufficient? That's where you need to be watchful, for it is to protect us from pride that thorns are often permitted. The call here is not to a mission, but to an affliction. It is the beginning of the conflict. Paul continues, "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me." Note the language. It wasn't just a problem. It was a messenger of Satan, an affliction with a purpose designed to harass him, to humble him, to keep him grounded. Paul's adventure would be to learn to live, minister, and glorify God, not in spite of the thorn, but because of it. Satan presents himself to God and asks for permission to afflict Job. Job's trial was also a permitted attack, with a greater purpose that he could not see in the moment of pain. God can use even the enemy's attack to fulfill his purposes. If you believe this, comment "All things work together for good." Paul's refusal is the most human and natural reaction we could imagine. He refuses to accept this condition. He does what any of us would do. He prays. He cries out. He intercedes. And not just once. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. 3 times. A number that in the Bible signifies intensity, completeness. Like Jesus in Gethsemane, who prayed 3 times for the cup to be taken away, Paul sought deliverance with all his soul. He didn't want to be a suffering hero. He wanted to be healed. He wanted relief. This is the refusal to accept weakness as part of the plan. Moses, in his difficulty in speaking, he asked God to send someone else in his place. He refused the call based on his weakness. God did not remove the weakness, but promised to be with his mouth. I prayed for years for God to change a situation in my family. I fasted. I cried out. And the silence was deafening. I felt as if God had abandoned me. I was like Paul, refusing to accept the answer I didn't want. And then, after the 3rd prayer, the Master answers. The heavens open, but the voice of God does not say, "Be healed," or "The messenger of Satan is rebuked." The voice of God says something much more profound, much more revolutionary. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This is the answer. This is the encounter with the Master. The divine wisdom that turns human logic upside down. God doesn't offer Paul the removal of the problem, but the sufficiency of his grace in the midst of the problem. Desperate and wanting to die, Elijah finds God not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in the still, small voice. God's answer rarely comes in the form we expect. The grace of God is what sustains us. If you need that grace today, follow this channel to be strengthened in the Word and comment, "Your grace is sufficient for me, Lord." This is the moment when Paul crosses the threshold. He stops fighting against the thorn and begins to embrace the grace. The revelation changes everything. He understands that God's plan was not to make him strong in himself, but to make him a perfect conductor of Christ's power. Acceptance is the turning point. He stops seeing the thorn as a curse and begins to understand it as the stage where God's power would shine most intensely. He enters a new dimension of faith, strength in surrender. Mary's decision. "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." She did not understand how she would be the mother of the Messiah, but she surrendered to God's plan. This radical acceptance released the miracle of the Incarnation. Surrendering to God is an act of strength, not weakness. Like this video now as an act of surrendering your thorns into his hands. Paul's tests are now daily. Every time the thorn afflicts him, he has a choice: to despair or to depend on grace. The main enemy, as the text itself says, is conceit, the pride of exalting oneself. The thorn is the constant antidote against this poison, and his great ally is the grace of God, which is new every morning. His life becomes a living testimony, a constant proof that it's not about him, but about Christ in him. Jacob's life after wrestling with the angel, he left limping. His physical weakness was a constant reminder of his encounter with God and his dependence. He was stronger as Israel, limping, than as Jacob, self-sufficient. But how is it possible to rejoice in pain? How can a man reach the point of boasting about his own weaknesses? Paul discovered a secret, a divine exchange that happens in the place of pain. What pride might your thorn be dealing with in your life? Reflect on this and ask God for humility. The darkness Paul approaches is not one of despair, but of total self-emptying. It is the place of absolute vulnerability. It is the recognition that, in his own strength, he can do nothing. It is the death of the super-apostle and the birth of the jar of clay. The darkness is the acceptance that the crack in the jar is not a defect, but the crevice through which the light of Christ can shine out. He stops hiding his weakness and begins to see it as a pulpit. God reduced his army from thousands to just 300 men, so there would be no doubt that the victory came from the Lord, and not from human strength. God weakens us to show us his power. If you feel like a cracked jar of clay, Like this video to declare that it is through your cracks that the light of God will shine. Here is the ultimate ordeal, the highest level of spiritual maturity. Paul not only accepts, he rejoices. He says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." To boast, to take pleasure. This is the inverted logic of the kingdom. He found a paradoxical contentment in his hardships, insults, needs, and persecutions. Why? Because he discovered that every weakness was an opportunity for the power of Christ to be made manifest. They told the king that even if God did not deliver them, they would not bow down. Their ultimate ordeal was a faith that did not depend on deliverance, but on the presence of God in the midst of the fire. The secret, the divine exchange, is this: when we boast in our weakness, the power of Christ comes and rests on us. We trade our limited strength for his unlimited strength. We offer him our inability so that he can fill us with his ability. Repeat aloud, "I am strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might." The reward is not the removal of the thorn, but something infinitely greater: the power of Christ dwelling in him. The Greek word for dwell is episkno, which means to pitch a tent over. It is the same idea as the tabernacle in the desert, where the glory of God dwelt. Paul's weakness became the place of the permanent dwelling of God's power. The prize was not relief, it was presence. It was not comfort, it was power. Where the presence of God dwelled, there was power to tear down walls and defeat enemies. Paul's weakness became the ark of the covenant of the new covenant, carrying the presence of Christ. The power of Christ is available to you in your weakness. Comment, "Your power dwells in me," to receive this truth into your spirit. Paul's road back is his transformed ministry. Now he returns to the churches not just with theology, but with lived experience. He can look into the eyes of the weak, the suffering, those who struggle, and say with authority, "God's grace is sufficient for you too." His message deepens. He preaches a gospel that is not for the strong, but for those who recognize their total dependence on God. His weakness becomes his greatest credential. After denying Christ, Peter was restored and received the mission to feed my sheep. His fall qualified him with the humility and empathy needed to be a shepherd. The resurrection is the final declaration, the climax of his journey. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is the resurrection of his identity. He is no longer defined by his heavenly visions nor by his hellish thorn. He is defined by this paradoxical truth. The death of his ego, of his self-confidence, gave life to his strength that was not his own. His ministry is resurrected, not based on what Paul can do for God, but on what God can do through a weak and surrendered Paul. God's ultimate power was displayed at the moment of greatest apparent weakness, the death on the cross. The cross is the supreme symbol that God's power is made perfect in weakness. The elixir, the treasure that Paul brings back for all of humanity, for all generations, is this eternal truth. God's grace is sufficient. It won't be sufficient tomorrow. It is sufficient now, in the midst of your pain, your struggle, your weakness. And God's power is not unleashed in spite of your weakness, but through it. Your thorn does not disqualify you. It qualifies you for a level of power and dependence on God that the self-sufficient will never know. The disciples, ordinary and flawed men, were sent with the promise, "Lo, I am with you always." The continual presence of Christ, his grace, was the elixir that empowered them. What is your thorn in the flesh? What is it that harasses you and keeps you humble? You have been praying, fasting, and perhaps even despairing for God to remove it. And perhaps today, his answer to you is the same as the one he gave to Paul. Son, daughter, my grace is sufficient for you. Stop focusing on the thorn and start focusing on my grace that surrounds it. My power wants to manifest right there, in that point of pain. The Lord is changing your perspective today. He's telling you that what you call weakness, He calls opportunity. What you call limitation, He calls a stage for His glory. God is not looking for perfect vessels. He is looking for empty and surrendered vessels. Allow the power of Christ to pitch a tent over your weakness. Allow His strength to be your strength. Do not curse your thorn. Let it drive you closer to God. Let it keep you dependent. For it is in the place of your greatest weakness that you will find the most extraordinary strength that exists. The strength that comes from Christ Himself. If this message has brought comfort and strength to your heart, subscribe to this channel now and turn on the bell. We want to continue to remind you that you are strong in the Lord. Think of someone who is struggling, who feels weak and disqualified. This message could be God's answer to that person's prayer. Be an instrument of grace. Share this video and declare this truth over your life in the comments by writing #When I am weak, I am strong. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:09.